I don't think you really have to do much of anything with the offensive line. Maybe, you know, sign a couple young guys, maybe make a couple investments in the draft to continue building out depth. But I think going back to last offseason, the big decision was, moving on from Mitch Morse, and there was question marks there. We're shuffling the line around, you're changing leadership, you're removing another cornerstone piece, and all of that on top of it, it was like the best offensive line we've ever seen in front of Allen. And I wasn't super comfortable with going ahead and making changes there. And well, this past season happens, and offensive line was every bit as good, if not better. And we're in a great spot here. Everybody across that line is under contract going into next season. I think you saw kind of fruits of Brandon Beane's labors, whatever, come to fruition, and taking a bet on Spencer Brown and extending him early and getting him locked in. That looks like a steal of a contract already. Deion Dawkins on the other side, just been constantly a really good tackle, protecting the blind side. Love his personality. He's awesome on the field. He's not showing any signs of aging. McGovern's transition to center, I thought, went spectacularly. I didn't see any ball security issues. I didn't see any, protection issues coming up. You drafted a young guy in Osiris Torrance. He had another good year. And then that leads me to the only real question that we have, and that's what to do with David Edwards. And the only reason I bring this up is because there is cap savings to be had here, and this is really the only guy that you could tinker with. And something like you could save $4 million against the cap if you cut or trade him, and you could also save like $2 to $3 million if you chose to extend him. And this spot, I think, is interesting because of the depth that we've built out in this room. And, on offensive line, honestly, not the sexiest, most fun position groups to talk about. But for being a fan of the team, like, not only am I, like, super excited about who our starters are, like, I'm over here giddy about what our second line looks like. Ryan Vandermark kind of took over last offseason as the swing tackle. Alec Anderson being that sixth man. He's been super effective in that role. You have Tylen Grable that we drafted last year in the late rounds, and going into last season, he kind of won that starting job or the swing tackle job from Vandermark. Ends up getting hurt. When he comes back, he kind of took that job again. And then Cedric Van Pran Granger, also in the mix, also a draft pick from last year. So, I mean, that's 3-4 dudes there that could be reasonable starters. And I think it's just a conversation worth having when you're talking about, all these kinds of extensions that are coming up for the Bills. When you have, yes, we locked in Shakir, but we still have to have a conversation about Terrell Bernard, Christian Benford, James Cook. There's conversations to be had there. And is there a spot where is it a spot where you're ready to make the jump to one of these younger guys and give them a role? Or are you just going to kind of keep letting them develop? Because, I mean, it's not like we have anybody that's particularly old across this offensive line that, they just have to wait like one more year till their time comes. They're all going to be waiting in the wings for a bit. So I think that's an interesting conversation to have. Again, I'm in a very similar space to where I was with Mitch Morse going into, last offseason. Of like, I have a hard time really thinking about, should we start tinkering with this offensive line because they were so good already? And this is not an area where I will pretend to be an expert or anything of that nature. I do know that Aaron Kromer is regarded as, one of the best offensive line coaches in the league. And I guess if I was in the position of power, I'd maybe just defer this decision to him. Like, you think these guys are ready to go? We can save some money. I think an interesting layer to this is also when Aaron Kromer came over from the Rams, the only player that he brought with him was David Edwards. So maybe it's easier in this chair to be like, yeah, we got guys waiting in the wings, get rid of them. Probably some sort of personal relationship there, and I know it's got to be business first, but there's really no urgency to move on from him. It's not like you're getting 20 million freed up in cap. It's 4 million. It's not nothing, but it's also not, a crazy value. So I think that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. And I would say if I was trying to be predictive, I wouldn't go the route of an extension, but I wouldn't feel urgency to move on from him. I think these guys that you got waiting can continue developing as depth. We've also had, knock on wood, tremendous health across the offensive line for the past couple of years. You have great depth there if something does happen versus, saving a few bucks right now and depleting into that depth a little bit. So worth talking about. We'll see what happens. I think that'll be one of the low key more interesting position groups to, I guess, just position to watch as we move through the off season.